My name is John Bain, and I'm liver transplant medical center.
Tom Gano, donor dad, was son was 16. He died back in July of '87.
I'm Pam Gleason, and my son was a donor 13 years ago. I'm married to a recipient, and I'm the recipient of a bone graft.
I'm Sue Kelchner. I'm a living kidney donor to my husband Bob, who's here somewhere. I don't know. But he's here. I brought him anyway. I don't know where he went to. But he got his first kidney from me in October of '92, and then he just had his second transplant from our daughter in May of 08.
My name's Gabrielle. I had a liver transplant in 1991, so it's been about 20 years.
What kind of transplant was it?
Liver transplant.
I'm sorry.
I'm Gabe Arcangelo, her father, her husband.
Hi, I'm Eve Arcangelo, and I had a kidney transplant in 1998, and I had a pancreas transplant in 2000.
Howard Cohen, 1999, my wife gave me a kidney at Huck.
I'm Steve White, and I had a heart transplant on November 4th of '08.
And I'm Jim Gleason. I had a heart transplant in '94. And with that,
I'd like to introduce Janet Andrews, and she is give her life story and experiences as a nurse since 1984. And Janet has been here all day giving seminars to the people who are the gift of life.
and with that, Janet, it's yours, and all I ask you to do is just speak up, because we don't have a good microphone system. But it's yours, as long as you want to share with us.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for inviting me. It's interesting that you give dates for all your transplants, because when you say the date, I think back to what I had reviewed for myself as to what I did in my life and how it's developed to where I am now. So it's really interesting when you say the date as to where I place myself in life. And in that, it's interesting when I look at my resume, it's kind of like how my life has gone. I've been a nurse all my life, it seems, and when people ask me, well, what did you do in the early 80s? I have to think back of, well, what was I doing as a nurse, and then I can place myself in what city I was and where I was and what the people I was with. And it was just really fun when Jim had asked me to tell a story about my life, based on nursing. So here it is. So I graduated in '84, and we talk about nursing shortages, but back at that time...
Can I ask where? From where?
In Philadelphia. I graduated Delaware County Community College. I lived in Maiden. I was raised in Maiden. So I'm local here. I guess that's why I wanted to travel, because I was from here. And I remember growing up, walking to school in the wintertime. I said to myself, as soon as I can afford it, I am moving south. And that's really kind of what I started to do. So in '84, there was a nursing glut, as you would say, and I went to an associate degree program, and basically it was a lot of LPNs turning into RNs. I was 24, I was one of the youngest people there, and I was pretty naive at the time. So because there was a glut in nursing here in Philadelphia at the time, I had to go outside the city to find a job. Along with all the other people I graduated with, some of the LPNs who had been put through school by their hospital were told that they don't have any jobs for them, that don't worry about the money that we've given you, there's just no jobs. So I put my application into Burdett Tomlin, which is down at the shore, and I did get the job. So here I am at 24, just graduated nursing school, and I'm spending the summer in Wildwood, which was really exciting for me.
Now, let me ask you to explain, for an audience around the country that doesn't know what Wildwood means, why is Wildwood special for Jersey people?
Wildwood, Jersey Shore, and it's out of all the different beach towns, Wildwood is It's called Wildwood for a reason. So it was really nice. The other crazy thing that I did is Burdett is located about 10 miles away from North Wildwood, where I lived. And because I was so young, I didn't have that much money, I was just starting out, I actually rode my bike there, and I did night shift. So I was riding my bike for 10 miles. If you know the area, you know where I was riding to go to Burdett, which is now Cape Regional. And it's this long stretch of nothing. And I've since, getting older, I've driven it back, and I can't imagine I ever did that. The whole summer, up and back for 5 days a week, 11 to 7. So. It's amazing what you remember doing when you were a kid, and you think, I could never do that now. And then the other most exciting thing that happened, besides all the fun, was that the day that I opened the letter that said that I passed my boards. Because I was very good in school as far as science was concerned. I was one of those people that took tests pretty well. But when it came to changing the bed, I had no concept. When they said 4 corners, to me that was Pat's. The 4 corners of Pat's steaks and Geno's. I had no clue how to make a bed. I had a quilt growing up, so we just went like this and it was done. I was really bad as technically, was concerned. But in the 20 years that I've been a nurse, I've gotten really good at changing beds and things like that, so with a lot of help. So spending the summer in Wildwood, I got to meet a lot of people, and there was a group that was going to go down to Florida. So I thought, well, that sounds like a really good idea. I'll go ahead and hop on that train and go down to Florida. And that was where I got my second job, was down at Northridge Hospital in Florida. And that's kind of like Fort Lauderdale. So I went from going from Wildwood to Fort Lauderdale. So as you can see, I'm a fun kind of person. But I'm very analytical, very logical, and all my friends were in the service business. They were bartenders and waitresses and things, and it was very difficult to be around people when you had a job that was so serious. I used to work day shift to start with, and then we would take a nap, and then we would go out, and then it would start the next day. And I thought, I really have to curb myself. I'm going to start working night shift, just so that I have something to do at night when I'm wide awake. I was a night person. So that's when I started night shift, and I pretty much had been nights the whole 20 years that I've been a nurse. So,
Was that 11 to 7 or 4 to 12?
11 to 7. Or when you moved into critical care, it was 7P to 7A. Remember, I've been a nurse for over 20 years, so I've seen many things change. When I started, we had to wear uniforms and we had to wear caps. So I remember that we had to wear white. There was no scrubs at that point. So I stayed there for almost a year, and then there was an opportunity for a critical care course in Orlando, and I went to Florida Hospital Orlando, which is an Adventist hospital, very strict, and I did a 4-month critical care course there, which was probably the best thing that I did because they were so specific on teaching, and they were very good at it, that I learned EKG from probably the best person that could have taught it. And I'm very grateful for that because I now am able to teach EKG, and I've always had a real knack for it. So that led me more into the cardiac end of things. But I learned balloon pumps and swans, like pretty much when they were just starting to come out into circulation. Because Florida Hospital is pretty big on hearts and transplants and things like that.
So this would be about what year, roughly?
That was in 85.
85.
Now, when you did the 4-month critical care training, were you also working at the time?
No.
Okay.
Usually when you take a course like that, what they're actually looking for is to train you to work. And they had a 40-bed balloon pump unit that they were ready to start staff. And they were actually training us for that. But I'm not really good at restrictions, and the Adventist hospital was very restricted as to what you could do and what you couldn't do. And I wasn't really able to fit into that lifestyle. So at that point, I left there. And then I started thinking, geez, you know, you're just job hopping. You really can't, you just really can't job hop in a profession that's a serious profession. So I decided to join an agency and decided to become a traveler because that would legitimize, traveling around. And I thought that was really cool, to go from place to place and not have any, obligations and just see what's available. So I took a job close to my friends to start with back in Florida. But since that point, I had gone, after that, I went to Enrico Doctors Hospital, which is in Richmond. And that was pretty interesting. Because what I kind of was trying to do is get closer to Philadelphia. Because even though Florida was really fun and the weather was always nice, it just seemed like it had more of a laid-back atmosphere that being from Philadelphia, you don't understand that, or you just don't see it yourself until you go outside of here, how different we are here in the Northeast and how more assertive, more work-oriented we are, as opposed to the South where it's more laid-back and things are a little easier, people are more retiring. So in Enrico, I got closer to home. I also developed a Southern accent because when you're with people that are in the South, they don't trust you to talk like you're from the North. And also, it was the first time I was ever with a group of girls that were travelers because I was on my own prior to this.
Interrupting if I may, going back to the difference in style, North and South, how, from your perception, does that affect the patient?
Well, it's interesting because as I progress further, I'll just go ahead as we're.
Okay, good.
I had a stint in New Orleans. I had 2 stints in New Orleans, and the first time I went down there, and I just didn't really understand how lax they were. The second year, I walked in, and there was a girl from Baltimore there, and she was pulling her hair out. She couldn't believe it, and I said, "Don't worry, honey, doctor knows." And that's how it is in the South. Don't worry, honey, doctor knows. Does that kind of explain things, the difference? Yeah. So in Richmond, like I said, you had to talk like you were Southern. One of my roommates actually had gone to a historic site, and she commented, she said, "Geez, I never knew that Richmond was part of the Confederacy." And the woman behind the counter got very upset and said, "Honey, Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy." So it was just interesting to be exposed to that, and that was fun. Richmond was a nice place. But it started to get cold, so I had to go back further south. So I went to Holmes Regional Medical Center, which is in Melbourne, Florida, and that's just south of like Cocoa Beach, Cape Canaveral, and that was one of the best places that I'd worked. I worked strictly on a floor that was cardiac heart failure, and I didn't really realize how much exposure I was getting to heart failure with those patients, because it was kind of new to me, and people were on dopamine and Norbornone.
When you traveled, how long was each of your assignments, or did that depend on you?
It depended on me. Originally, they were 3 months. Sometimes, I know the Hawaiian assignments were like 6 months, but I never wanted to go there. 3 months, if they liked you, you stayed, or you just continued to work there until something came up or you just wanted to change. So it really depended upon where I was and how much, either fun I was having or how much experience I was getting, whether I stayed.
Okay.
But at Holmes Regional, I liked the weather. It was in Florida, and I really liked the floor I was on. It was very well run. We always only had a max of 4 patients, which was kind of unheard of at that time. And that was January '87 to April of '88. So I stayed there over a year, which was a lot for me. Jim had asked me when we were talking before, he said, well, I know you have some funny stories. And said, yeah, well, I do have a funny story, and the one that comes from Holmes is, we used to have a scale that was a kilogram scale, because all the drugs are based on kilograms, so we would weigh somebody in kilograms. So this little couple came in, and the man was being admitted, and I weighed him, and he was like 46 kilos. And I think that they were Jewish, the way they presented themselves. And he said, 46 kilograms, can you convert? And I said, gee, I don't think my mom would appreciate that. So that was a laugh. We had a fun laugh at that. But after that, I enjoyed that area so much, and I kind of had exhausted myself there. And Holmes was a traveling assignment for me. And I liked the area so much that I decided to stay. And I took a job at Cape Canaveral Hospital, which is up at Cocoa Beach. So at that time, I had an apartment that was just across the street from the beach itself. The fun part was that I could walk up to Coconuts, this place Coconuts, that had the best, what were they, rum runners? You'd have one rum runner, you could walk the beach home okay. 2 rum runners, you had to be careful. I don't think I ever went for 3, but that was a lot of fun. Cape Canaveral is kind of on a jetty between the mainland and the island itself. And the hospital, the way it sits, behind the hospital there's like a lake that's formed. So you could see the rockets that went off, and the rockets would reflect on the lake. And there was one night when they were setting off the rockets from Cape Canaveral, late at night, and we seen it go off. And the woman that was in the bed with me in the ICU, she's like, oh, and I'm like, oh, and I sat her up, and we both watched it, and you could see the rocket go up, and you could see the reflection of the light in the water. And that was really cool. And I know she appreciated it too. Yeah. So that was fun.
Now, how many beds was that hospital about? I'm just curious.
I'd say that was about 150. It was a small hospital, but it was enough to support that area. When I started there, I started on their telemetry floor, and I moved up into their ICU. And on their telemetry floor, they also had pediatrics. They had a little 8-bed pediatric unit. And it was there that I learned how to take care of kids and put IVs in kids. And actually, now working with donor families and talking to children, it gives me a perspective that way. Because I don't have any children myself, and it's kind of hard to put yourself in a position with donor families who you're talking about a child, and that's kind of where I get that experience from. So after I had my stent at Cape Canaveral, and that was by the end of '89, I was ready to go traveling again. So I took an assignment at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and while Baltimore is like one of the coolest places I've ever lived at. For me, when I was growing up, my mom always took us to Washington, and Wilmington and Baltimore are just stops on the way to get to Washington. But Baltimore is a really great place, and if you ever have an opportunity to go and stay for a week, it's really cool. Where they had us housed was right on the water. We got to know the people who own boats. We knew the river taxi that went into Inner Harbor, and there was a lot of freebies that we were getting there too, so that made it nice. But Johns Hopkins to me wasn't a good experience. There was a lot going on. It seemed like a lot of the medical staff and the attendings were really the top of their field, but it just seemed that you were working with people that were getting education from there. You weren't really working with people that always were at the top of their game. So while I really liked Baltimore, I just couldn't stay at Johns Hopkins anymore. And instead, I went to Sinai Medical Center, which is it's like an Albert Einstein to Johns Hopkins, I guess.
Where was Sinai?
Sinai is in Baltimore
In
also.
Baltimore, okay.
Actually, it's right in the parking lot of where the Preakness is, the racetrack. So that sometimes when they were running races, you could hear the races as you're walking into the building. But that was in '89 that I was there. I'm sorry, that was in '90, April of '90. And back at that time, that was my first exposure to HIV and AIDS, and what that actually looked like in a patient. And we had just been discussing it this afternoon about, back in 1990, what AIDS looked like is not what you're seeing now with all the drugs that we have. People were really suffering back then. But it really was a good experience to see what it looked like, because you don't really get to see every aspect of medicine, and when it's talked about, you don't always get to experience it. So that was a good experience to be exposed to that.
And was that cardiac or med surg?
That was more med surg type area. And again, that was with traveling. So with a traveling assignment, you always had to weigh whether you wanted to do high level stuff or you just wanted to be in an area and just do a job. And be in, like I said, Baltimore was a lot of fun. And then I had talked about earlier that I was in and out of New Orleans, and that was about that time. We had like a circuit going. So in the summers, we would go up to Baltimore because of the boating. And as it got close to Christmas, you'd go home and you'd spend time at home. And then because Mardi Gras is in March-ish, and they only gave you 2-month assignments in New Orleans, I think that's all probably people could handle, because it really seemed like it was a 3-month assignment.
In what
Orleans
sense?
is rough on you.
In what sense? In what sense is it rough? I mean, partying outside of work or the work itself or what?
Partying outside of work
Okay.
and the eating. I always gained 10 pounds. It wasn't like I ate anything more. It must have been just what the good food that they had. There was good food, good drink, good music. There was always something to do. So I think you kind of burned yourself out early in New Orleans. But I went twice. I don't think I need to go again. So at that point, I kind of had enough of traveling. I wanted to get back home. I really wanted to, get married. And I wasn't meeting anybody, that took me seriously. Because now here I am a traveler. What do? Oh, I'm a nurse and I'm a traveler. How long are you going to be here? Gee, I don't know. My assignment's over in another few weeks. So you never really were taken seriously. And being from Philadelphia, I guess I was looking for more of a guy that was from Philadelphia. So I started getting closer and closer up to Philadelphia. I worked in Medical Center of Delaware for a while. And finally, I made it to Hahnemann. And I started Hahnemann in September of '91.
Okay, so what you did at Medical Center of Delaware and Hahnemann?
Medical Center of Delaware was just in their ICU, just for a quickie assignment, just to get close to Philadelphia, just to be able to get back and forth. And my friends were here, and I think I lived with my friends instead of taking housing.
Okay. And then Hahnemann?
Hahnemann, I worked at Hahnemann from '91 up until I started working here.
Okay.
And I've been working here for 3 years. So I started working at Hahnemann as a traveler on the 21st floor, which they called the penthouse at that point. Because in '91, Hahnemann was one of the premier hospitals in the area. And a lot of people flew in from New Jersey to when they had chest pain, or they needed cats, or they needed really anything. I don't remember who the physicians were at the time that were working there, but the whole 21st floor was all chest pain, rule out MI, or it was end-stage heart failure. And I really liked working at Hahnemann, and I can rank Hahnemann as one of the best hospitals I've worked at. And it isn't necessarily what they do, it's really the people that you're working with. There's just something special about the people the poor people that have always been there and still to this day are there. So I stayed there at Hahnemann until '92, and then I started working. I don't know if you remember, there's always been this flux and of the nursing shortage, nursing shortage. So there was a point when being a traveler wasn't really it wasn't really cost effective. So being an agency nurse here in Philadelphia was better for me. So at that point I went and did agency. And I worked for an organization called SNI, and they were out of Flourtown. And I think that they're still there. I think that's one of the agencies that are still there. And besides working again in Hahnemann, I worked at Pennsylvania Hospital. And that's the hospital. I actually lived on Clinton Street, which is right across the street from Pennsylvania Hospital. So that afforded me the ability to work a lot in a short amount of time, because I would do about 4 doubles a week. Now, it seems like a lot if you talk about drive time, back and forth, but if you're only walking across the street to go, 16 hours isn't all that much. All you have to do is you go to work, you come home, you sleep, you go back to work. And that's what I did when I was in Pennsylvania Hospital.
In the 90s, were they doing 12-hour shifts like they do today or no?
It still was pretty much 3 to 11, 11 to 7, 7 to 3. So I could do that. And actually, that's the time that I met my husband in '91. And my husband is a recording engineer. And he was in Philadelphia, and he was doing his thing in Philadelphia. And in about '93, in '93, we decided we were going to go back down to Florida, to see what was up for him. And that was prior to Miami Beach being South Beach. It was before that, right before that. But we went down there, and he didn't do too well with getting a position because it was right before South Beach became what it is now. We actually were looking at property to buy, and we walked into a place that was a 1 floor, just redone, about 2 blocks from the beach in South Beach for $60,000. We didn't have that much money. We didn't have anything. So, like you think now, geez, $60,000. Whoa, what an opportunity. And they also were selling condos. The old hotels that they had, they were selling converted condos, stripped down. You'd have to finish it for about that same price, $50,000 to $60,000. And you were overlooking the beach. You were on the beach overlooking the ocean. So some opportunities we passed up. So we only stayed there for about a year, came back to Philadelphia, and I started working again for agency. And I worked at what was NurseWorks at the time, and that was another big agency here in Philadelphia, and that was in '94. And I started working at Presby and did some time at Presby, and the agency sent me to Temple in the Pacquiao, and I liked it so much, they liked me so much that I ended up staying there for about 4 years, from November of '94 to April of '98, which is a big stretch for me to stay at one place. And Temple ranks as like the second best place I've ever worked. And Temple, they say, if you work at Temple, you can work anywhere, and it's absolutely true. Because what you see and what you do, and how much you work, and how much everybody really cares about what they do there, really is good training for.
Was Temple a part of that too?
Temple at the time, for me, it was the recovery room at Temple. I started in the recovery room, and then I branched off to an area that was called prep and hold. When people would come in, I would check their charts to make sure that everything was right, everything was signed, sealed correctly, the correct limb we were going to work on, it was the right person, you knew exactly what was happening. That was my job, was to make sure that everything was signed, sealed, and then we would put an IV, and then we'd ship you out to the room. which actually, in the job that I have now, going through charts and making sure everything is perfect is what I do now. Because in my charting here now, everything has to be perfect. So that was a good experience for me to do that. I think it's interesting with that position, people would joke with me, and I'm very serious at times. And you know, you hear stories about operations happening on the wrong things, and it was my job to make sure that that didn't happen. And I can see from what I've seen. Oh, everybody's hand.
Jan's saying goodbye.
No. Okay,
Not you.
I can see from how mistakes can happen, because I would say that I caught a lot of mistakes. And I caught maybe major mistakes, one every week. I mean, we had about 40 to 50 people a day coming through, and there was about, one major mistake that could have gone through every week. So I can't imagine it doesn't happen a lot more.
Let me ask you, DB, just for a minute. What advice would you give to patients to avoid being that one mistake? Is there anything we can do?
Well, you have to ask questions, and you have to make sure that you know what's going on. And, when they put a piece of paper in front of you, you have to read it. Whatever's typed is pretty much standard, but when they start filling in things, you really have to read what they're filling in. You have to make sure that they're talking about the correct side, or they're even talking about an operation that you're actually getting. Permanent marker.
Yeah.
Well, they do that now. They stamp you on one side, or they put an X now, because I'm sure it had happened so often that that's one of the solutions that they've come up with.
Were there common mistakes that happened more than others?
I would say, just thinking back, people not understanding the exact surgery that they're having. A lot of mistakes were clerical errors. What's on the consent wasn't the same as what was on the schedule, wasn't the same as what we knew we were going to do. So your consent had to be the same as what was scheduled as what the doctor knew that was going to happen. So everything had to be in agreement. I think those kind of mistakes, clerical errors were the most. But it goes through so many hands that, a clerical error can be a big deal. So I stayed at Temple for a number of years, and it got to a point at Temple that I either had to stay there a lot longer and become invested, or just go back to doing agency again. And it was the right time for me to go back to doing agency again. So, and I got married. I stopped working there in April, and I got married in September. Okay. And at that point, I went back to agency, and I went back to IntelliStaff, which was NurseWorks. So NurseWorks converted to IntelliStaff, and I started working for them.
And just out of curiosity, what are the advantages or disadvantages of being agency besides being able to move around easily? I mean, here you were at Temple, you liked what you were doing. Why did you decide to go back to agency as opposed to being invested there or something?
Well, how I described earlier about the nursing shortages and the nursing glut, when you're in a period where they're not hiring, that's the time you want to be in a position as staff. When there's a nursing shortage, financially it's better to be an agency nurse, because you can go anywhere you want and you can command a higher salary.
Yeah.
Now, when there's a glut, say there's a glut in Philly, does that necessarily mean there could be a glut in Florida? Or
That's a good question. Probably not. Well, here in Philadelphia, we have so many schools, so many hospitals that it's a good indicator of what's happening. But you're right, like in different areas, there's always a shortage.
Okay.
Such as what areas would there always be a shortage? Just out of curiosity. Trying to think of why, for example.
I'm not sure, like, right off the bat what to say about that, but I would say in the Midwest,
Oh, location-wise, they're short.
location-wise.
As opposed to type of nursing, okay.
Oh, no,
I
not
misunderstood.
type of nurse, no.
I misunderstood.
Location in, as far as the country is concerned.
Gotcha.
Now, if there was a shortage in the Midwest, would the agency pay you more to go to the Midwest or not necessarily?
They would. It all depends on how much they need you, as to how much they're actually offering for a contract.
Did you ever say to them, they say this, set amount, and you say, no, I want more?
Well, I've heard in Baltimore, you can be self-employed, or you don't need an agency, and you command the salary. But I don't think it happens that way everywhere.
And how do you get benefits if you're an agency? Does the agency provide you benefits, or is that part of it? You're on your own?
You're on your own.
Okay.
But being an agency nurse, I felt, geez, I don't need to have insurance until I'm about 40, you know? Because if I get hurt, it's probably an accident, which driving covers, right? That's how I thought. I was raised healthy, I'm relatively
This is
healthy.
amazing, watching patients all the day from different conditions that you still think are good.
But I came from, a family that nobody was sick, nobody had cancer, I really had no reason to believe that, I know, I'm saying something that you probably said, no reason to believe that I'd ever
We
get
never
sick.
believed either, did we?
I can see that.
Did you ever think I work at a hospital, they'll take care of me if I got sick, or?
I did break my ankle at Northridge when I first started, and they did take care of me. They let me be a secretary for the 2 months that I had a broken ankle. So they did. So my experience wasn't... Well, when you're young, it can happen.
Who paid at Northridge for your care?
Well, I ended up paying for it. You have to remember that was back in '85, and it only cost me like $500 for the whole thing. Right?
Yep.
The ER visit, everything. I was an employee there, so I got an employee discount for everything. So I think the bill was about $500, and they let me pay it over time. Now, what would it be, 5,000 for a broken leg?
Your firstborn.
It's funny, my mother, who was a nurse, we're talking back in the 40s when I was born, because she was a nurse, having a baby, my father went to pay the bill, it was 10 cents for the phone call that she had made. Everything else was covered by the hospital. So things, yes, have changed, even in your last quarter century, as well as before that.
Well, what else is interesting?
What?
Well, what else is interesting that has changed? I remember a time when nurses smoked at the desk. And then
Wow.
they got moved to smoke in the break room. And then it was the insurance companies that said, you can't smoke in the hospital, and we're not going to insure you. But yeah, I remember smoking at the nurse's station.
Well, smoking was supposed to be healthy at one time.
Yeah.
General question. In the last 3 months, I've been in the hospital 3 times, once for a considerable period of time. And it was clear to me that most of the nurses didn't approach their duties in any systematic, comprehensive way. This is at a major teaching hospital in Philadelphia, okay? Even the mature nurses, even those that could handle a stethoscope and knew what to do, didn't systematically look at me and say, what does he need? What would I want if I went here in the bathroom beside my table? It was incredible, and I felt I would, if I said something really oppositional, run into trouble. So I said nothing.
I'm really sorry to hear that, that's your experience. But, I...
Some of them could have been on 12-hour shifts.
That's not an excuse for bad care.
So are you saying they kind of just like brushed off like their genuine like care for you?
No, they did do the important things, but it's not what I would do. I would have a checklist and go over it. Make sure the towels in the bathroom. Or soap. No, I was amazed.
Well,
I kept having to ask for this, and this, and this, and this.
it must be frustrating because you're helpless, you're in the bed, you're really relying on people to help you. The only defense that I have for that is that I know that besides you, there's probably 10 other people that this one nurse is taking care of.
Right, and maybe it has to spend a lot more time.
It's probably not the nurse's duty to make sure those supplies are there, I would guess, given a nurse and the other ranks of people there that maintain your room and stuff.
I think
Nurses
their
and-
responsibility.
You know, it's really hard to find a good team that works well together, where you have the nursing assistants are taking care of the needs that they need to take care of, while the nurses, the registered nurses are taking care of your medical needs. And you know, it really takes a whole team to have you have a good experience. And it's pretty rare. That's why I say, Hahnemann is one of my favorite places to work, because it always seems to be a camaraderie with nurses. They're always willing to help each other, where that's not always what you get everywhere.
I was even in a heart unit, although I didn't belong there. So you would expect a little better.
Jen, maybe you could just explain, because we've all been through this, but there's so many people that come in and out of the room. From a nursing standpoint, what are the hierarchies of nursing in a typical caring center, as opposed to an ER, let's say, in terms of, is there one head nurse, and then there's, what's the hierarchy of nursing care that you would run into in a typical hospital stay?
Okay. It's different in ICUs compared to med-surg units.
Okay.
Or your regular med-surg units. In an ICU, you have a nurse that's in charge, the head nurse. They're called different things all the time, everywhere. And then you would have regular staff nurses. Kind of above them or beside them, sometimes they have educators for the unit. Sometimes they don't have educators for the unit. They'll have a charge nurse, someone that is in charge for that day, or maybe the charge nurse is the designated charge nurse.
I'm sorry, what's that charge nurse mean?
Meaning, if I was in an ICU and I was just a regular ICU nurse and I had a patient assignment, my patient assignment would be 2 patients, but there's 10 patients. So there's 5 nurses. The charge nurse is overseeing the events of the whole floor for that night. So admissions that come in, get divvied out, supplies have to be restocked, things that need to be ordered. There's a lot of extra stuff that goes on to have a smooth operation going, and that's what a charge nurse is for.
Because what I'm looking for is in health situation, for example, when you see something, I mean, I've been there too, I think everybody has, where this nurse is doing what the chart calls for, and she shouldn't do that because you just had that done before they wrote in the chart, and she's coming in now, following up, saying, oh, you're going to get the shot. What's your recourse when this nurse, who knows what to know, is saying, no, you get the shot. No, I've already had the shot. And she's not listening. No, I got to give you the shot. No, you're not going to give me that shot because I just had it.
So what's the recourse?
What's the recourse? Who do I turn to? How do I make sure she didn't give me the shot?
Well,
The second
I
time.
would just ask for the manager, ask for the
Okay.
manager. And if if she's not available, or if it's like a night shift, then you ask for the physician.
I'm sorry, Pam, what?
And then she says, I am the nurse. And you say,
Or the one in charge, and you're right, we do that, and sometimes we lie. I'll
Yeah.
admit, sometimes we lie and say, no, we're in charge.
Yeah.
Then I would ask for the physician, on call. Like if it's in the middle of the night.
and then you get some second-year med student who doesn't really know their rear end from a hole in the ground and wants to draw blood out of your foot or your groin, you know, if you just had a bad catheterization. Because the nurse can't get blood out.
I know, it's, you know, it's really tough.
So what do you think your choice is gonna be?
It's really tough to be a patient, and I never, like, had the experience until November of this last year, and I was a patient, and I was in the bed, and I was kind of scared.
And you know, the office should have to be a patient.
Right. And what was interesting too is I got rolled in there, and I knew I was doomed because my roommate had one of those beds that are on the floor, and she had an assistant sitting with her, so she was one of those people that were being watched 24/7. And I thought, and they said, oh, well, she screams sometime at night. I was like, oh, this is my nightmare. I'm getting me back, bro.
Well, now, and I know we've interrupted your career talk here, but let me just ask you, with the background experience you've had, and seen mistakes, and then how did you act differently as a patient to ensure that you got the care you deserved?
I have to say that once I started asking for things in the emergency room, specific things, they knew what my knowledge level was. So that even though I was kind of in and out, I think they kind of sensed that they couldn't.
Of course, you get two reactions there, right? You get one, she's a fellow nurse and we take special care of her.
No, I didn't get that.
Or you could get the, oh, who the hell is she to tell me what to do? She's just another nurse.
Well, I didn't act like that either.
Okay.
I think
That's
that
good.
they just were just a little more cautious about what was happening, because
Oh,
when
cautious.
things were hanging up, I would ask, what is that? And they would give me the answer.
So the advice to any of us going in there without your past experience would be to, as you said before, ask questions
Oh, yeah, ask questions.
and understand what's going on.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, my biggest advice too is to write questions down for your physician. Because a lot of times you're sitting there, you know, for 24 hours you're sitting there and you've got these questions. Doctor comes in 5 minutes, he's gone. And you're like, and you're enamored that he's actually here talking to you. You have the questions written down so that you don't forget what you wanted to ask. And you're also thinking about it through the day. You're not just, you know, bothering every time that you have another thing to think of.
Based upon Harold's experience, would you say in Philadelphia, is there a nursing shortage or a nursing gluttony?
I think it's pretty leveled out right now.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
At this major teaching hospital, every time I had a roommate, 3 times in a hospital, for many days, each roommate was incoherent, psychotic, not able to understand directions, leave the TV on, make it very difficult. If I wasn't who I am older and been around the block, another person would have gone off, I'm sure.
You know,
What's going on?
well, the only suggestion that I would have for that is you need to have a conversation with your attending. He's the one that actually can make things happen. He's the only one that really can make big things happen, like getting people moved out or getting people to treat you better. So if you have a conversation with your attending and you tell him all your concerns about what's happening, I think that's really the best way to go about getting what you need done. Because the attendings are the people that really are the most respected in the hierarchy.
Can I ask what hospital you are? Because I don't know, I'm kind of afraid to say this because then I might
I'm not,
lose some
right now,
privileges.
I'll speak to you.
Oh, okay, well, as a transplant patient, I've never had to share a room. They've always isolated
Transplant is
me.
special, is that right? Transplant, if you were the transplant unit at 10, you get a single room?
Not always.
Not bad, okay.
And maybe during the transplant process, but there's many other times you end up in the hospital for other reasons, and you're just a normal patient.
Right.
You know, so you're not back under their
I
care.
haven't had that experience.
Good.
As soon as they know I've had a transplant, I've always gotten a room to myself.
Been very fortunate.
Very.
That's not everybody's experience.
Right.
Okay. I thought it was always because of the immunosuppressants.
There are not a lot of rooms available in certain hospitals in Philadelphia. That's part of the problem.
Depends upon the type of transplant also.
Kidney.
I know we've been out too, I think that has something to do with it.
Janet, there are not a lot of rooms available in the hospital. Period. Right?
There's not a lot of rooms available, and the turnover is quicker and quicker. People used to stay in a hospital for like weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
How much you looking at?
Yeah, now they only go up now.
Speaking of being a shortage of rooms, I had a transplant, and they told me I had to come back, like, within a week of leaving the hospital. And when they brought me back, they ended up putting me on a regular floor. And the people on that floor didn't know transplant.
Right.
Even the residents didn't know transplant. Because there were procedures that they forgot, didn't realize they had to do. And it wasn't until they then moved me back to the transplant floor. So I think that's a problem too, like, people that are working on that floor aren't familiar with the process or the procedures that are necessary. I mean, I was supposed to have my blood level checked. It wasn't until like, I'd say 3 o'clock in the afternoon that they finally did. And it's one of the things you're supposed to have done early because of your medication. So that could be a problem too, that people aren't.
I think that's part of what we run into, because I would say that when it comes to hospital care like that, we've gained more experience as patients than the average person getting shoved into the hospital. So you come in not for an isolated situation, but for long-term care, if you survive that long, right? And so you have 20 years of experience, for example. You go into a unit, and you know cyclosporin and Neuro is not the same thing. You can't just oh no, we'll just get that for you. No. You know, and you hear these horror stories of people, well, they know better. And if you don't stick up for yourself, you know, you're going to be a statistic. And so that's part of the education we get as patients. Again, if you survive long enough, you pay enough attention, and you have to speak up for yourself, or your caregiver better speak up for you if you're in an incoherent situation.
Right.
And I'm sure every one of us could entertain this room with our stories out in tonight, couldn't we?
Right.
Yeah. Well, I can admit, as a nurse, as a young nurse, even only 10 years in, I probably didn't give the best care that it's not the same care that I would give now. You know, and you are faced with younger people with less experience. You know, nurses like me that have been there over 20 years are pretty few and far between, and then we kind of tend to graduate into the ICUs. And I think the problems come in when you're on med-surg floors, on regular floors, you know, and these are new nurses, or you're dealing with ancillary nurses. They're not necessarily registered nurses, maybe they're LPNs, maybe they're nursing assistants that are giving you care.
I have one question about, you had said you were graduated from community college, and then you had to apply for your boards and pass them, or was that once you were an RN, did you pass the boards? Like, I didn't quite get what happened after community college and how you have to be an RN.
Well, community college offers a 2-year degree RN program. You get an AS degree, and that allows you to sit for your boards.
Okay. I thought you went to community college for the LPN.
Yeah, I wasn't in LPN.
Okay, gotcha.
All right, come on back to your career. We're going to get you to gifted life at some point here. Go ahead.
Pretty close, I'm almost close.
That's not to rush you. I just want to get the whole story together while we're still tuned into where things fit.
So from 98 to 03, I continued to work agency in the area. I worked at Bullseye, which is now Jeff Moreau. I worked Thomas Jefferson, Presby, Hahnemann again, Graduate, a whole bunch of hospitals.
And again, just for the sake of the audience, these are all Philadelphia-based hospitals you're moving around to. They're literally, in some cases, blocks away from each other.
Right.
So it's quite a closed community.
Right.
all 3-month stints?
No, the agency nursing in the city is you, each week you call your agency and you find out what's available for that week and you book in time.
So each week it could be a different
You could be
hospital?
at a different hospital,
Wow, that's weird.
like today or tomorrow. You don't have lots of time at certain places. Usually they would request you and you'd stay at a place, but, you know, the best thing to do really was to move around. And actually, I think I was involved with more than one agency, so I could get bored. Because I'm a worker, you know, I just like to work, so I always work. And then it became a time again when agency work just was starting to dry up. You know, they weren't offering the extra shifts out. So I thought, well, I have to get a job on staff again. And liking Hahnemann so much, I went and took a job at Hahnemann. And with all my experience, they put me in the CTICU area, which was really a great place for me at that time. Because even though I worked in a lot of ICUs and I worked everywhere and did a lot of different things, it never really all gelled to where I was so confident as to what I was doing. Like if there was a code, you know, you always were a little worried. So being able to recover heart transplants and bypasses and valves, coding patients, working on the CBVH machines and the LVADs and things like that, I got to a point where I was very comfortable with what I was doing. And actually that's helped me a lot as a transplant coordinator because when I take over a case with a donor, most likely they're brain dead, which their brain is not controlling their body anymore. So it's really up to the nurses to control those functions. What was I saying?
Talking about brain death.
Right, and taking care of a patient that's brain dead. So that experience really helps me out a lot. And you can, you know, because the worst thing that you want to have with a donor that's been consented is for them to code or you lose the opportunity of the donation. And that's something that I've been able to be very successful at not having happen.
Now, when you say you're a transplant coordinator, do you do it from here, or do you go to the hospital, or both?
I work for Gift of Life,
Yeah.
for the organ procurement organization, and I'm sent out to a hospital when there's a referral. I evaluate the patient for their opportunity. I wait for a pronouncement of brain death, or when the family decides to make a withdrawal decision, and if there's an opportunity there, that's the time that I approach a family and, you know, have a consent conversation with them. If they say yes to donation, at that point, we start the process of stabilizing the patient for donation, sending out samples for kidney matching, serology testing, things like that. We'll get the testing for the heart. We'll need an echo or a cardiac cath to evaluate the heart. We'll need a bronchoscopy to take a look at the lungs. So those are the two big things that we have to do.
Now, before you do that, the hospital nurses already asked the family if they would like to donate, or is that what you will do?
That's what I do.
Pardon?
They should not have.
All right, okay.
Right, the representative from an organ procurement organization should be the only one asking for donation.
Okay.
And that's what we teach to our hospital partners.
Okay, now, do you do that after all your tests or before?
Well, the only testing that we do up front is serology testing, which is the Hep B, C, HIV testing.
So you know that before you ask the family? You know the
In most
results of that
hospitals, we're allowed to do that prior to.
before you ask the family?
Right, because it is part of the evaluation to determine whether or not they're suitable for donation.
Okay.
Because you wouldn't want to, the thing is, you wouldn't want to talk to a family, get them interested in donation, and find out that there's something that includes donation just from the start. And you could have ruled them out. A lot of my job is ruling in patients for donation.
So what percentage of families who you ultimately ask to donate are going to be able to do
If I do my job right, 100% of people that say yes to donation are going to donate. Because my job is to find out whether there's anything that precludes my asking.
And once you ask, do they all say yes?
My percent is not 100, but this year I think I'm 75%, which is pretty good.
That's great.
I mean, you started out pretty low, which I did. And here in Philadelphia, it's a little tough. There's a lot of traumas. You know, it's tough.
How long are you typically on site before even the brain death is pronounced?
Well, what we do is we'll take a referral from the hospital, and our hospital services coordinators actually educate the staff to what the triggers are. So depending on the hospital and how savvy they are with the triggers, is as early as a patient is rolling into the ER, and the ER is calling us saying there's a potential donor here. We'll go out and evaluate. Now, depending on where they are in the process of brain death, we'll keep them on our list, and we'll call them on the phone and find out how things are going after we made that initial evaluation. But if things are moving pretty quickly, and there's going to be either a withdrawal decision by the family within a 4-hour time frame, or if they're appearing brain dead and we're moving that process forward to being pronounced, then we'll stay there and we'll wait until all that happens.
So I'm just shutting up anytime you want to. Of families who say no, what's their primary reason?
It's really hard to say why they say no. I mean, technically I need to have a reason why, but I would say a lot of it is I think that there's like psychological reasons like anger, things like that kind of block people's generosity. And that's part of my job, is to break down everything that's happened in a family, explain to them what they don't understand, ask them questions, ask them what I can help them with, what don't you understand about what's happened. A lot of guilt sometimes, talk about that. Get them to the point where they can put aside the emotional part of it and be able to allow them to think about their loved one in a generous way. So it's really kind of a process of getting them to a certain point.
You talked about testing for matching. Do they still, for the pancreas, do they still take a portion of lymph node for testing or not?
That's,
They did that in '87.
I think we do that when we're in the OR, when there's interest in the pancreas. I think it gets sent off to the transplant center.
This got done probably early on when they were deciding who was going to receive the pancreas.
Right.
They did that. One of the first things they did is they took a portion of lymph node to test to determine who was going to receive the pancreas. They're still doing that, do you?
As far as I know, I think we still do that. My experience personally in the OR is pretty small because I'm a lot better on the front end, and I know that a lymph node removal is part of one of our procedures, and we don't do that many pancreas here either, so I don't think I'm qualified to answer that exactly.
Well, the heart, they used to use a big square machine they put over the top of the chest to decide how it's the size of the heart.
No, we don't do that. No.
The person who initiates the question to the family, is that a nurse or is that a social worker?
That's me.
At the hospital, you said when they're rolling in, they wait for you to come to the hospital to ask the family?
Right, all the nurse is doing is picking up the phone and calling upstairs.
Okay.
And saying there's a patient here that meets the criteria.
Okay, so there's no prep before you come to the family?
No, the only prep that they'll be talking about is the fact that the patient has been pronounced.
Okay.
Or they're not doing very well, grave prognosis is given to the family, and they say, well, you know, you wouldn't want to live like that, I think we'll take them off the ventilator.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry to ask this again, but if you get 100 phone calls from nurses, how many of those people are able to donate?
So when somebody calls from a hospital, in New Jersey, they have to call every person that they're going to take off the ventilator, they have to call. Like a terminal extubation, they have to call us. So a lot of those people don't meet criteria, and we can evaluate them over the phone. Or, I think, certain disease processes we can evaluate over the phone. So the process really is the nurse sees a patient that meets criteria, they're on a ventilator, they suffered a neurological injury. The nurse calls us, they talk to the TIC here and give them the basic information.
What's this?
Right above us, the Transplant Information Center. And that call gets routed to what's called a CPTC, who's the person in charge of the schedule for the day. It's a transplant coordinator that's just in charge of those kind of calls and takes care of that. So that person will call the nurse back. A transplant coordinator like myself will call the nurse back and ask her a few questions. What kind of history do they have? What did they suffer? What's their pressure been? Any kind of responses? And based on those kind of answers is whether or not we're going to send somebody out. If we send somebody out, they stay on they met the first round of criteria. If we don't send somebody out, they're not going to be suitable for donation.
So, of those phone calls, what percentage would you send somebody out? Do we have?
Like, how many phone calls do you get a day, usually? Does it vary?
It really varies. It really varies.
They do have a record of how many they get in a year, and they do give that information. How many calls they got at the TIC over a year, how many were potential donors, and then how many donated.
We do have those.
They record that, but I don't know what those numbers are.
I'd say
They're really
maybe
high.
I'd say maybe a third will go out on site and evaluate. A lot of times we'll get out on site the first time and we'll see something that wasn't communicated.
How many evaluators does the Gift of Life have?
How many transplant coordinators?
Coordinator, yeah. I mean, you yourself.
We have about 30.
Okay. Okay.
Half of us live in what's called the satellite, which is kind of west of Turnpike. Going towards Harrisburg
Oh, okay.
and Lehigh Valley. I've never been to Harrisburg. I don't really go to Lehigh Valley or St. Luke's.
Okay.
But I do stay in the city here, and we'll go to Atlantic City or Delaware.
You're traveling all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, as you can see, my experience is really, when I came here, there's a lot of reasons why people don't stay here. But when I came here, I was like, geez, we travel in a car, we go to different places, we only stay there for a certain length of time, or we stay there for the whole day. You're kind of on your own, you're making your own decisions, but you still have somebody that you're on the phone with, communicating with, an advisor, an administrator. And so to me, this is a really well-suited job.
Sort of the traveling nursing.
Yeah, there's different parts to it. You have the evaluation, you have the consent conversation, then you have the management of the patient, and you're working very quickly to bring the case to the operating room. So the quicker you can get it to the operating room, the better it is. Because, this person has been pronounced dead, and you're trying to keep them circulating until you get to the OR. And actually, you're trying to improve their condition.
Have you ever had, a number of patients at a hospital at a time that you're working, or are you specific to one patient? Or like maybe 2 or 3 that they called you at Temple, and you're working all 3?
Well, that happens a lot in big hospitals, like University of Penn or Temple. You could get 2 or 3 referrals, depending upon where you are on the main case. Once you have consent, that's all you're doing. And they'll send somebody else out.
Okay.
And even if the case is difficult, say if there's difficult management issues with the patient, say, something has to be corrected, the heart needs to be pumping better, they'll send somebody in just to specifically work on managing the patient. Or say if you're a new coordinator, they'll send somebody in to specifically assist you with getting everything together. Because there's a lot of stuff because you're not only talking about managing the patient, you're also talking about getting things prepared and allocated, and you're talking to the surgeons, and there's a lot of stuff that goes to that.
That's what I was asking, so you're coordinating with the surgeon to harvest each organ?
Right, what we do is, once we have all the diagnostics in place and on UNET in the computer, we hit a button on the list. There's a list that comes up, and we look at the list, and we say we hit the first 10, and we notify. Everybody has BlackBerrys now. So, and when you're notifying, you're actually coming up on the surgeon's BlackBerry as an offer. So there's an offer in Philadelphia, and just the general information. They go on UNET, they look at what the donor is, and they say whether or not they're interested. So if they put a check and they're interested, and they're number 1, I'm picking up the phone and calling them. I see that you have interest in this. You want to talk about it a little more, or you have all the information that you need. And then they say, no, I'm interested in this. What time is the OR? What's going on with the rest of the organs? Okay, so you're the first organ that I'm working with. So as soon as I can allocate the heart and the lungs, we'll have an OR set. I'm looking at something in the next 8 hours. Or I'm looking at 4 o'clock. That's where I'm shooting for. So that's the first organ. And now you're on to the next one. And you're doing 2 or 3 at the same time.
So your button, you hit, your first 10 could be 10 patients from 4 or 5 different hospitals to separate surgeons, correct?
Oh yeah, they are.
So you're working with all those that come in and say, I'm interested, boom, 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 they light up 4 different hospitals, 4 different surgeons, they call and say, yes, I'm interested. So then they have to come to call you back and...
No, I'm the one that's running the show.
Okay.
And the list is generated by UNOS. It's all electronic. So whoever is number 1 is the first person that's considered.
But then you hold that to see if they really want it, so you have to wait for that person. Number 1 says yes. If they say no, you go to the second.
Correct.
Right, so all that has to be timed.
Correct.
Wow.
Correct. Just like the other day, I was allocating a heart, and you can only notify 3 centers at once.
Okay.
Well, if it takes the 3 centers 20 minutes to say, okay, I saw that, all right, I'm looking at it. And, sometimes you want to hurry them up. And you pick up the phone and you say, hey, I seen that you got that. Did you really take a look at it? Is there any information that you want? And they'll ask you. This way you're cutting down your time. Because, you can't notify the next person until somebody says yes or no.
Right.
So you're going down the list, trying to find somebody to say yes.
But in those cases where a patient's getting calls, say, you're a backup, come on in, what's happening there?
Oh, when you're a backup?
Yeah.
When you're a
From your
backup?
standpoint, what's happened that caused somebody to be a backup?
Well, somebody is a backup because I have somebody above them saying yes.
Right.
And we know from experience that something may happen. So what do we do to back it up in case something happens? Say to the patient, say to say to the recipient might not be ready, because that recipient might not be in-house. And maybe they're traveling in, and maybe when they get to the hospital they have a fever, and that's all it takes.
Or they couldn't get in touch with them, despite...
Or they can't get in touch, they'd like to have the organ, but they can't get in touch with them. And they give them a certain length of time to call back, but they haven't. And then it becomes a decision. So I'm still calling to back myself up, because we could even be in the operating room, and the surgeon could say, geez, I don't like how this looks.
Right.
And it could be perfectly fine. It's just that's what his preference is. Maybe it's the size. A lot of times with organs, it's the actual size. When they look at it, that person's measurements may say that the organ would be this size, but when you look at it, it's not going to work. So what do? We're in the operating room. Well, I already have somebody that's backing it up. So that surgeon will take that organ out and we'll ship it to the backup. So you're always backing yourself up.
We have one backup.
So,
No, I have more than one backup.
so first of all, I think, you can stay here as long as we'll keep you.
I know.
But, it's hard for me to believe that, I live in Transplant. It's hard for me to believe that on the day, and the moment that I had my transplant, that I had the highest Mills score in my area. It's just impossible for me to believe that. So what other circumstances could, maybe I'm wrong. So are there other circumstances that, could have existed that allowed me to have the transplant?
Well, Tom, you said this morning that your liver came from a 70-year-old person.
Right.
So 1, 2, and 3 may have said, I'm not going to take a liver from a 70-year-old.
Well,
Because one could have been a 19-year-old and they're saying,
yeah,
I would take a chance.
that's possible, but no one asked me. I wasn't told at the time that it was a 7-year-old liver.
I understand, but maybe
But your
the doctor, the surgeon knew that. Your surgeon
All
knew
the
that.
surgeons that had, if there were surgeons, what's your blood type? So, that wouldn't rule that out. Those, the biggest.
O can only accept O back, so your chances were higher that you needed that.
And it's your size, you're a tall guy, right?
Yeah.
So it goes by size. So you probably fit the size that, say, if the offer was from a 6 foot or taller man, well, somebody my size couldn't have taken that. So I would be off that list. I wouldn't be on that same list as you are, because our sizes would be different.
And then there are 2 separate lists, right? I say the perfect list and then the not so perfect list. I know. Waiting lists, and there are 2 separate lists?
No.
Sure there is.
There's only one list you're thinking
At any
of.
one time, there's only one list for a donor.
You're talking about different types of criteria organs.
Depending on the criteria.
That's not the list.
There's only one list.
I think I titled them, the list.
Maybe as a recipient, that's
Yeah.
kind of how you view it.
Yeah, because I'm 44, I got a 58-year-old who was in a car accident, and then there was, I think I was told there was a separate list, like a perfect match, but I was on the waiting list for like 3.5 years, and I was like, I'll take that, if the doctor deems it fit to be transplanted.
And you received a kidney transplant, correct? Kidney transplants are different.
Okay.
First of all, I don't allocate kidneys because they're so involved. There's so many people on the waiting list that the criteria for receiving a kidney is pretty strict in that it goes to the best match.
So who does the allocation of kidneys then?
The
You're working a case.
The information center upstairs.
Okay.
Okay.
That's all they do is kidney pancreas.
There's also someone who has rejected a kidney may now have to have a perfect match. So
I did
they
have
have
one,
to
I
go-
had
so they have to
a
go to a
perfect match with my sister, and it lasted 10 years. I had bad ear infection, long story. And then I got a second one from, it wasn't so perfect because I developed antibodies from blood transfusion and.
So you didn't have the 6 matches. There's
Right.
there's 6 matches.
Right,
So being perfect means that all 6 match.
right,
So maybe 4 matched. But
yeah.
you still were the best match of the day.
Yeah. Okay.
But you still were up high.
And I'm O too, so positive.
But everything's like very fairly, there's laws and rules and regulations, and, if we break one, we get written up like big time government-wise. So there's all these rules.
For kidney?
Yeah.
Okay.
For all the organs, but there's more for the kidneys.
Oh, okay.
The allocation rules are different for every organ.
Okay.
So when you were doing, when you got called to the hospital, you were there for the whole day. Is that the norm, or is that the exception to the rule for you as a coordinator?
I'm the coordinator that goes out on referrals a lot and evaluates a lot, and I think that they see that as one of my strengths, and I talk to families a lot. So I'm usually the one on the front end. So I can say that for every 3 times I go out just to look at a chart, and we're going to send off serologies, and we'll keep them on our list, we'll call and see how things go. Probably like 3 times out of every 4. Maybe that 4th case is the one that I'm going out on. There's a first exam that's consistent with brain death. I'm waiting for the second exam, family to come in, and I'll talk to them.
How long do you stay there now?
It could be anywhere from 2 hours to 30 hours.
You have consent?
I have consent, I'm there until the morning when I get relieved, no matter what time I get there.
Oh.
We do two 24-hour shifts in a row. The most we work is like 36 at one time.
So it's possible you would leave before transplantation is complete?
Right, I would pass the case off to another coordinator.
So you said that, and again, if I'm asking a question, I should ask, just tell me, but you said that a lot of people don't stay here that long, but you'd like to. What's the matter?
It's a good fit for me. You know, it's just like simple things. I knew somebody that, I knew a coordinator whose husband really didn't like the idea. She got up at 2 in the morning and drove to Temple. You know, just simple things like that.
Yeah.
The fact that, just the little things that you are driving. One of our coordinators was really afraid to drive, but since she's been in this job, she's overcome her fear of driving. Just walking into a hospital that you don't know, walking onto a floor, working with people you've never seen before, you know, that's kind of fearful. Or even speaking to a family, it's a lot.
Yeah.
You know, I did hear of one person that really had moral issues about what we were doing, and they really got down to learning what we actually did. So, you know, there's a lot of reasons, a lot of little reasons why people don't fit the job, because there's a lot of different things we do.
But it's certainly a heavy burnout job from the stress you're under to, along with different personalities and so forth.
Right, we are under a lot of pressure
Yeah.
to perform. That's what Rick is all about, because everybody knows Rick, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he's my boss, and maybe once every 3 times, every other time, like, he'll be my boss on the phone while I'm out. So everything I do, I report to him. So if I don't get along with the family, that's who I have to say, I didn't get along with the family today.
From a transplant coordinator standpoint, and from going out on the call, what's a bad day for you? What makes it a bad day?
What gets me upset?
Or, no, like, you know, I work in computers, the system's crashing, you know, that's a bad day. So for you, is there a bad day, or?
To me, a bad day is when when I don't get consent, that's bad. And depending on how it goes, it can be worse. You know, consent that is a no can go a lot of different ways. Probably, well, a bad day would be a patient that coded. You know,
Are there any?
besides like the really bad things happening, those are really bad things that happen. But bad things that happen would be, it's taking 2 hours to get an echo. The doctor's nobody's cooperating. The nurse is a new nurse. The patient's, needs to really be monitored, and you're working with a nurse that's not experienced.
Have you ever encountered a hostile situation with a family?
I guess in other people's perspective, I have, but you have to remember the situations that I'm being put in. A lot of people are hostile for different reasons. It isn't against me personally or even about donation. It's really about what's happened.
Do you ever have people that say no and then change their minds to yes?
Yeah, I have had that. Well, that's my job, is to get the no to change to a yes.
Right,
And I
okay.
actually have had one where I've left the hospital and the physician and the nurse continued talking to the family in a positive way and convinced them, and I came back and they signed consent.
Well, I want to make sure that everybody's had a chance to ask questions. Bob, why don't you introduce yourself since you were here for the beginning?
All right, I'm Bob Kelcher, kidney transplant twice. My wife Sue gave me her kidney in '92, and our daughter Laura gave me her kidney in 2 years ago. Oh, wait.
And the other person who came in late and didn't introduce themselves?
My name is Nancy Woodson. I've had 2 kidney transplants, one in '94 from my sister, and in 2004 from a non-living donor.
Okay. Is there anybody that has a question that didn't get a chance to answer, to ask the question? If not, Jen, that was very interesting, and we certainly enjoyed going on that long trip with you, 25 years of career. That's
You
fascinating.
can see why she's so convincing, you know?
Yeah.
You're very convincing.
Well, it's interesting how we get speakers. Pam and I were out at Gwen and Mercy as part of a presentation there to the nursing class, and she was observing. And just in the course of conversation, I said to myself, we have to hear this, because she had, just in the conversation, intrigued us that this would be something that we thought we might find interesting here. So, Janet, thank you for accepting that invitation and for coming on out on the end of a long day and sharing what you did. Yep, Steve's got a presentation to make.
We'd like to give you a book. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, great, thank you so much.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you.
On those tough days, read that book and you'll be
Okay.
motivated.
Thanks so much.